Right, I'm Eoin Garden. Well, we're on Avenel Station, a 5,000 hectare property originally at the bottom end of central Otago, and we're currently standing about 2,000 feet above sea level. So it's hill to high country property, but a very, very productive property in terms of sheep, beef and venison. My brother and I bought this property back in 1965, and the landscape that we're looking at was absolutely treeless. It was a property that had been part of a large settlement area in 1919, and the returned soldiers were settled on little blocks of land about between 200 and 400 acres in size, and in the Depression they walked off. So the land had been farmed probably intensively from those days, but at this altitude and with this climate, the properties weren't sustainable, and we ended up buying a property that was an accumulation of a lot of those small blocks. Challenges of farming in this environment is the exposure for particularly young livestock, and typically we would have possibly 5 snowfalls during lambing, calving of our beef cows, and obviously when our hinds are fawning in this environment. Now, with this type of tussock, there is shelter for the young animals, but as you develop this land and make it more productive, which it can be, then you lose the typical shelter that we're standing in, and there's absolute necessity for planting much more woodlots or shelter belts, shelter blocks for the livestock. We set about planting two-row windrows in this environment, and because we sensed, or we knew that we needed to provide shelter for livestock. And of course a two-row shelter belt was fairly ineffective in this environment. What we then did, we planted on the back, the top end of the most exposed ridges to give shelter to the livestock, and what that meant was that we tended to plant the whole gully face, which might have been 50, 100 metres or more in depth, and ended up with woodlots as a consequence of our shelter planting. So I've got to say that our forestry planting on Avenel started on the basis that we needed shelter for not only livestock, for grass production, because it's certainly, with that level of forestry planting there's about 200 hectares of forestry that we're looking at there in total. But so it allowed the pasture production crops, it gave them shelter and far higher production. We realised that there was a real need for and an opportunity for forestry in family succession. Now, we've got a family of 4 children and we've now got grandchildren coming on, but we've only got one of our 4 members of the family who are involved with farming, and we realised for the other members of our family to if you like, share or get a value from our estate in the future, then the common challenge for farming families is the farm has to be sold to split the returns or give a share of the assets. So what we did was we recognised first of all that forestry gave a return, or it was an asset that could be utilised which didn't threaten ownership. So the member of the family that we have in our farming business has a sense of security that the property is going to be there for him and his subsequent family, and we have planted quite large blocks of forestry on Avenel and purchased other land where we've got quite a large forestry asset, and in fact we're looking at one in the distance. There's about 160 hectares of managed radiata, pruned, thinned radiata, and that's in partnership with my brother. So they're the sort of assets that at some point in time when the return for forestry is appropriate, that can be passed on or harvested for other members of the family. This is a great example of how we've integrated forestry planting with livestock. Way back in 1985-86, we planted quite a big gully face which was very exposed to the south. In the winter time it would be just solid, frozen solid, the ground very steep with a lot of scrub on it. We planted this block. It hasn't been managed particularly well. There's still a lot of trees that might have been taken out, but we've pruned the good trees. But now every winter we use this for wintering our young deer. There'll be 400 to 500 weaners that winter in here. We let them run onto crops and the high producing pastures just next door, so the gates are open right through the winter, and when it's really rough and snowy, they'll probably come and sit here in here for 2 or 3 days without even coming out and shelter. They lie on the pine needles and in the shelter of these trees. And the beauty of that is that with young deer, when it's very cold, they'll physically lose a lot of body weight regardless of how much feed they eat. And in this environment, we're keeping them warm and giving them high quality feed in the paddocks next door. So we manage this as specifically, if you like, as a very large 40 hectare, 45 hectare wintering pad for our weaner deer every year. It is a constant challenge for the pastoral industry to ensure that livestock production is maintained. One of the options, I think, is to not just maintain production but enhance production with the use of appropriate forestry planting. Behind us we've got a young block of Douglas fir. Now, whilst there is not the opportunity to graze livestock in Douglas fir, because livestock will certainly damage the bark and degrade the potential log value, but that's an area where we're using that as a major shelter block to protect livestock on the sheltered side. So there's a bit of integration going on. Certainly Douglas fir at the higher altitude would be the species of choice, and you've just got to use them appropriately to plant in areas that you can get shelter from as well. I've got to say that my involvement in the meat industry has significantly diminished my involvement with the Farm Forestry Association. It's over the years we've got a tremendous lot of enjoyment, a lot of benefits from being part of the association. We've had a lot of field days up here, and we've had the real benefit and pleasure of going to other farm foresters' field days and sharing the knowledge, sharing the opportunities, and just the friendships that the association has provided for us. Certainly over the years we've planted a lot of forestry blocks. We've had our challenges in terms of the success of planting, and over time we got that right and got really good survivability. But the joy of working in an environment like this, where not only do you have the shelter, but you have just a wonderful landscape where you can enjoy farming. The next generation have an anticipation of returns coming for them, those who are not farming, and it's just a wonderful a wonderful place to farm. It's a great farm now to own and share with the next generation in our family.